Welcome to Green Building Matters, the podcast that matters for green building professionals. Learn insight in green buildings as we interview today's experts in LEED and WELL. We'll learn from their career paths, war stories, and all things green, because green building matters. And now our host, and yes, he has every LEED and WELL credential. Here's Charlie Cicchetti.
Be sure to check out the Green Building Matters community, where you can have unlimited exam prep for any of the professional credential exams you're tackling next, as well as putting your continuing education on autopilot, saving time with GBS reporting your hours on your behalf. Check it out, gbes.com/join. Now, enjoy this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. Today, I've got a LEED fellow, Marni Jade Evans, with us. We're going to talk about the early days around LEED when she was at Paladino. We're going to talk about even being early with the Living Building Challenge and so much more. But Marni's joining us from Austin, Texas. Marni, how you doing?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you, Charlie. How are you today?
I'm having an awesome day, and I can't wait to talk more about your story. I've gotten to know you a little bit. We've had some calls, and now we get to get you on the podcast and see this all the way through. So Marni, you've got an incredible story here. I always like to start, where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school?
Sure. Well, I am a proud Canadian and a dual citizen. I grew up in a small city in Alberta, which is called Medicine Hat. And I was so lucky because I got to watch my parents hire an architect and a builder to actually build our family home when I was a teenager.
Oh, wow.
So I know. Who do you know that is that lucky?
Mm-hmm.
So I would pore over the floor plans and then take after hours visits to our house while it was under construction. And I just became so fascinated just watching the process, from visualizing the space and putting pencil to paper and then ultimately living in the finished product. It was so cool. And luckily, again, I just feel like the series of events lined up perfect for me. I was able to jump into architectural drafting in my high school. And so as a teenager, I was already learning how to draft by hand and hand letter and using early versions of AutoCAD. And we had this great drafting teacher, and he would invite students from nearby Montana State University to present their work from the School of Architecture. And it seemed so clear to me that studying architecture at Montana State was exactly what I wanted to do. So that was the only school I applied to. I attended Montana State. I did a 5-year graduate degree there. And at that time, green building as a term hadn't even been coined yet. My graduate thesis was, I was inspired by beginning to think about architecture as a means for healing. And the thesis was about Architecture for Humanity's design competition that was creating transitional housing in war-torn Serbia. So it was a really interesting time to look at the humanitarian aspects of the building industry. And, once I graduated from college, I basically threw a dart at 3 different maps. With Seattle was an option, San Francisco or New York City. And the dart hit Seattle and off I went. I had a bunch of failed interviews. Oh, I just bombed them. I finally found myself working for a 30-person architecture firm, which is now defunct, and for good reason. They focus on really cheap and crummy urban infill projects. And I was just so embarrassed working there. It was the same cookie cutter designs that it ended up being one of the best things that ever happened to me, because it created a fire in me to improve the quality of the buildings that we were working on and to sort of be the voice of conscientiousness within the firm. I was like really one of the key defining moments that launched my career in sustainability in Seattle.
Oh, it's fantastic. I'm sure that's a great place to start to apply sustainability in it. And just going from architecture to sustainability. And then I know we'll talk in a minute about your time at Paladino, but just, along the way, did you have anyone else that maybe opened some doors? Any mentors, some mentors, right, Marni? We actually sit down with, spend time with others from afar, they kind of influence us. But any other mentors early on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Well, I do have to give credit to the crappy firm. After I bashed them, my boss at the crappy architecture firm said, listen, what are you most passionate about? And how can you help to either elevate or differentiate the firm? And I was just stunned. At age 24, I literally had no idea. Pretty much wanted to go drinking and, hiking, and that was about it at that time. So I told him I'd get back to him. And when I did, I told him that I wanted to be the advocate for green building. And he said, well, what do you mean by that? And I realized I wasn't really sure. To go back to him again. And that time I went back to him and I said, listen, I found this really inspiring program. It's a 9-month certificate program. It's called the Sustainable Building Advisor Certificate. And it was created by Kathleen O'Brien of O'Brien and Company. Oh, yeah. And so the firm agreed and they paid for me to attend and sort of become the in-office sustainability guru. And the challenge I faced was every time the boss would put me in front of our developer clients, this was back in 2001 and 2, they would ask me questions like, how much does it cost? Or how do we specifically implement this? Where are we going to get these materials from? And of course, that didn't exist. So that's the point by which I went on to find Paladino and Company and actually get to work on green projects. It wasn't enough to theoretically learn and study. I needed to actually do the work. And, Kathleen was an incredible mentor for me, but hands down, I'd have to say it was Tom Paladino. He and his brother, Paul, taught me so many things about the technical aspects of the building industry, as well as the art of consulting and how to tell a great story, which I think is really important. So
those are some big names, some great mentors. So for those that don't know, Marni, tell us about Paladino, because I remember I tell this anecdote that when I got into LEED in the probably mid-2000s, and you would pull up an Excel file that was an early LEED, probably version 2.1, 2.2 scorecard, and you're like, hey, who made this? It would say Paladino and Company. So tell us about those early 2000s, or you might have even made it. Who knows? Yeah. Tell us about the early days of LEED when you were up.
Yeah. Sure. I may have helped shade one of the cells a different color or something. Tom and his firm Paladino and Company authored the first LEED reference guide, and they ran the version 1.0 LEED pilot. And when I first started there, one of my first jobs was to analyze the first 70 LEED version 1 projects so that we could pull patterns and look at how credits were being achieved, with the idea that we would train the staff, not only of USGBC, that were going to be working on certification. So like folks you've had on your show, Brendan Owens and Scott Horst and the like, but then we were also training the review teams from around the country, of which there were 5 at that time. And so I felt pretty awesome. I was at the top of my technical game and was one of the first, handful, 5 or so LEED reviewers that existed in the world. So to some people, that's pretty cool. It's, being in the right place at the right time. If you're one of those people that was working on LEED way back then and you're still mad about your review comments, hey, listen, I'm sorry. Nice. I apologize in advance. Feel free to give me a call. I'm sure we could patch things up. Just teasing. They're completely anonymous. But it was really exciting to be at the forefront of that as we worked together on some really world-class projects.
Wow. Now, we always joke about who's LEED review team C and who's LEED review team K. And inside joke. So you were there in the early 2000s, but then, being up there in Seattle, you got involved with Living Future and the Living Building Challenge. So tell us about that next step there.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, I was pleased to be invited to become the Washington State Director of the Cascadia Green Building Council, which at that time was the local arm of the USGBC. I was operating in Washington, and we were one of the first chapters. We were also the coolest because we were the only chapter that encompassed 2 countries. So we would hop the border often as we shared our chapter between Washington, Oregon State, British Columbia, and Alaska. So it was a very broad swath of geographic area. And it was incredible because all of the best practices that were occurring throughout our region were being shared among practitioners and municipalities. And it was a really, really exciting time. And we had a transition with our CEO at the time, and we wanted to hire somebody that was really visionary. So we actually, as a nonprofit, hired a nonprofit consultant who helped us write just really the most kick-ass, extraordinary job description for our new CEO. And at that time, I knew who Jason McLennan was. I'd seen his work through BNIM Architects and read some of his writing. And when I saw that one of his resumes was the stack that, of course, had been shortlisted, I nearly fell over. I was so excited because I knew that with Jason at the helm, we would be able to do something remarkable. And of course, we did. Our board had given, if you will, like an edict to put together a conference that was a localized version of Greenbuild. And around that same time, we had started working on version 1.0 of the Living Building Challenge. And so we thought, well, why not combine the two and use a conference, the regional chapter conference, to launch the Living Building Challenge and really bring that to the forefront. So we did. We brought in a big name speaker. We brought Ed Madria, which was also unreal because he talked a lot about his vision for the future, which led to the creation of 2030 eco districts, of which Seattle was an early participant. So that was pretty cool. We also launched and called it the Living Future Unconference. And one of the goals of that was to, I guess, throw that sort of talking heads style of conference on its side and say, listen, maybe there's another way we could do this because there's so many powerful, incredible, inspiring, intelligent people in the room. Let's have an event that is meaningful and impactful and has something that comes out of each session. So that's where the concept of this unconference was formed. And I can say that working with Jason McLennan on that project on Living Building Challenge as well as Living Future Unconference were just perfect examples of how just one person can make such a massive difference in the world. Really was his leadership that really helped move the industry forward. So.
Yeah, for those listening, I mean, you just heard it here from Marni and tapping Jason there and look at where that program is at now. And while we are fans of the Greenbuild Conference coming up in Atlanta, the Unconference, you got to look into that. It's just some amazing programming out there. So Marni, you spent time in Seattle, but now you're in Austin, Texas. So what brought you to Texas? How's Austin treating you?
Oh, yeah. Thanks for asking. Well, I love Austin. I love Texas. And I'd say that one of the big highlights in my life was deciding in 2008 to start my own green building consulting firm in the heat of a recession. And moving it to Austin because I had a client there, the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, who was working on a new initiative to create a LEED-like rating system, but for sustainable land design and construction.
Okay.
And that was a sites program. So the Sustainable Sites Initiative. So they hired me to help them as a sort of rating system expert to help with the technical evolution of the pilot of the sites program. And that's kind of how I got my start in Austin. It was such an honor and a pleasure. I remember touring the Wildflower Center and just feeling like the place that I was contributing to as a sanctuary. It was almost like a religious experience. So if you haven't been to the Wildflower Center or your listeners haven't, I highly recommend it. It's just a stunning place. Yeah. I just remember hanging out there and seeing all the awards that the First Lady had won and just hoping that I could live up to the legacy that she created.
Well, and I'm sure you're really proud that fast forward today, there's Sites AP, the Sites program is really growing. And it's, I think we've talked about this before. I'm having a little deja vu here, actually, Marni, that, you've really been involved with some pretty pioneering projects. So you got to feel proud. And, no better time to start a company, right, than during a recession. That's when I started my Greenbuild. company as well. And it's just up, it goes up from there. So look at you, and you've done amazing things there. So, I do want to ask about some more of your proudest achievements. Sure, it's a humbling question to look back on the highlight reel, but you've named some amazing companies and some cool projects. But what else stands out on the highlight reel there?
Ooh, it's so tough. I feel so lucky to have had so many cool opportunities. I would say, and this is a story I was going to share later in our interview, but I'll share it now. When I was living in Seattle, there was this incredible furniture store that I would constantly stop into. It was called Greener Lifestyles. And the woman who owned it was from Mexico originally. Her mother owned a furniture factory, and she would do these super beautiful designs and use very high quality, sustainable materials, FSC wood and wool and non-toxic fabrics, etc., and manufacture these beautiful sofas, etc. And since I go in all the time, I just befriended her, and I would bring her reading materials because I found out that she had practiced and learned or went to architecture school in her previous days. So I influenced her to take the Sustainable Building Advisor class that I was telling you about earlier that Kathleen O'Brien started. And after she did that, she ended up later moving on back to Mexico City. And she called me up and she said, listen, and this is when I was in Austin working on the consulting practice. And she said, listen, I really want to start a green building consulting company in Mexico City, and I want you to come down. And so I did. And we wrote a proposal that we won to green the, at that time, second tallest skyscraper in Latin America. So using LEED for operations and maintenance, we worked with the facilities manager and just rocked the charrette that we had with the facilities team. And I have to say the proud moment there was standing on top of the helicopter pad at the top of the building, looking out over Mexico City, realizing, oh my God, I have literally made it. I'm standing on one of the tallest buildings in this hemisphere. This is just phenomenal. It's so incredible. And to this day, and the building at Torre Mayor has been recertified over time, and my friend continues to work with them on recertification. I think back to the light that was shining in the facility manager's eyes when he explained that of the 10,000 occupants that came and went from that building every day, wow, if we could influence even half to ride their bikes to work, one day a month, or turn off a light bulb, or replace their printer paper with recycled content paper, that those 5 or 10,000 people would also take that home to their family. And that ripple effect and of that change that was occurring just by these seemingly small but massive actions was just profound. And it still is to this day.
What a huge building, 10,000 people, tallest building. You're right. That's something you never forget, being on top of that building. And I'm a big fan of the O&M rating system and EBOM. And you're right. If you can just get past the tenant reps sometimes and go to the occupants, change some occupant behavior, they bring it into their personal life, into their homes. And I love it, the ripple effect. So that's a cool building. Anything else stand out you want to kind of say on the proudest achievement? And then I want you to, if you would, get us updated on what you've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years within the U.S. Green Building Council.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, let's just jump to that. I want to tell you a little bit. USGBC is always fun, and things are just moving fast and furious with the launch of B 4.1. That's always fun to help support teams. I feel like in this stage of my career, 20 years in, it's really pleasing for me to, like I mentioned, that light, bringing that light into people's eyes. So a lot of what I do now is really taking a back seat, planting seeds for people, and then helping them grow either in their role within the organization or, on their own projects or consulting firms, allowing them that space and providing that support so that they can flourish. So that's a pretty cool aspect of what I do. And I'm really lucky I get to work from home while still being in the DC office.
Yes.
remotely. And if anyone in this planet can, find themselves a role where they can work remotely, do it. Not only from a carbon footprint perspective, but just for quality of life, it's the best. So that's that. I'm gearing up for the ASLA annual conference that's going to be next week in San Diego. The URL is asla.org, and it's the American Society of Landscape Architects. And there I'll be representing sites. So if any of your listeners are planning on being there, come by the sites booth, and I'd be happy to just say hello. The most exciting thing I'm working on right now, Charlie?
Yeah, go ahead.
I have to tell you. Okay, sorry to talk over you. I wish I could see your face and your mouth and moving, because then I'd know if it was appropriate for me to speak. So I recently purchased a 1955 Spartan Imperial Mansion.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I'm in the process of greening it. So we're going to be installing a composting toilet, green flooring products. I decided to go with cork, even though I probably have more of a marmoleum taste. Maybe in the next remodel, I'll do marmoleum. And then we're going to also do solar-powered air conditioning. And what's cool is about these trailers, this particular one is 44 feet long. They look a lot like an airplane. It's really just a big tiny house. But they were manufactured by the J. Paul Getty Spartan Aircraft Company after World War II, when they had the surplus of airplane aluminum left over. And they really look a lot like a plane. And we're just excited. So my partner, Lance, and I are going to remodel. And then we are going to park her in a remote part of Central Texas. And we've got an organic garden that we're going to start and try to go off grid with. So that's my real exciting living project that I wanted to share. Since the last time I talked with you.
Keep reducing that carbon footprint, Marni. You're doing great.
I try.
I've got to point out, most start with the USGBC and then end up in private industry. And you kind of did the opposite here. So you went out and did some amazing things and ended up at the USGBC. But that role you're in right now, it just seems like there's a big need for it. Not just from a customer service, but those projects that really need someone like you to get involved and get it further along and say, look, here's our different programs. Here's what would apply for you. And this is why you need to do it. So it seems like you've ended up in just a really great role. And you're right, quality of life, working remote, even just some teleworking a little bit each week. You have to focus on that.
Cool. I feel real lucky.
Well, good luck with the renovation. That's going to be really cool. The tiny house and getting that garden going. So I'd like to ask this question, Marni. If you had a crystal ball, where do you think this sustainability or this green building movement is shifting next? What should we be reading up on?
Yeah, I love this question. And I lay awake at night thinking about it. I think that I know a lot of your guests have talked a lot about resiliency, and that's certainly the future. But I really believe, due to the way the climate is so dramatically changing, that the purpose of our buildings will entirely shift. So they will become more about shelter, just bare basics, right? About safety and about self-reliance. And it seems like we've had so much peace and security in sort of middle-class society over the past 70 years here in the United States and in Canada, that there's this sort of sense of security and peace, that an idea that we can stay in one place. The types of buildings that we build are really dominated by that concept. My intuition, it's telling me that the entire building industry is about to be completely disrupted by buildings that are mobile, that are temporary, that are fast to build, that are inexpensive, and that are technological. So I guess that is in part why I'm very interested in the Spartan lifestyle and tiny living. But also, I'm seeing a rise in these really interesting new companies. So 3D printed homes. If you check out newstorycharity.org, are printing homes for people around the globe.
Oh.
It's phenomenal. And this actually came out of Austin. The founder of Treehouse, which is the green building supply company, has done his research, and he sees the future of housing the global population in 3D printing. Another company to take a look at for trends is the company called Casita, and that's with a K, and that's also based out of Austin, started in Austin. This is the idea or concept that if a home were more like an iPhone, and if an iPhone were a house, what would it be like to live inside that? Some people think that might be awful, but I think it would be kind of cool to just tell the lighting system to turn off and on, and to have the glazing, automatically become more translucent or opaque throughout the day or whatever, right? There's also companies like Living Vehicle. That's livingvehicle.com that you could take a look at. And it's like a very sophisticated, very luxurious moving home that has been designed by an architect based out of California. So I just feel like that will be the new trend. And at the heart of all of it, it seems like minorities of all colors and stripes and genders in leadership roles will help to define what the future of architecture looks like, being either, on Earth or maybe even on another planet.
That's very thought-provoking, and I love it. That's one reason I do the podcast here. We have to stop and think about the future. I don't think we do that enough. We're so busy. Everyone's busy. And so I want to follow up there. If I may, you're trying to go off the grid, but it's inevitable. We've got this technology, and then we'll have artificial intelligence. So with the other Austin company that kind of has that smart but mobile, home, and just, do you think you have to have both, or can you push back on the technology when it comes to our buildings and homes? The whole Internet of Things movement. It's going to be hard to avoid, right?
Yeah, I think it will be hard to avoid for mainstream dwellers. I think there's been plenty of us that have hopped off grid in all kinds of ways, in alternative, much lower tech lifestyles for a very long time. But I think to really bring it to the masses, I think keeping up that sort of like luxury and technology interface is going to be really important to convincing people that they don't have to give anything up to live smaller or to live mobile. Yeah, often it's a trade-off, right? It's like, sure, I could go live in a yurt and there'd be so many benefits to that. But really, I kind of love my kitchen, and I love my Nest device, and I love the list goes on. So I think there's an opportunity here to really reflect the kind of culture that we are, which is what architecture does. It reflects who we are at a certain point in time. And we are so technologically focused that it seems like the right time for this movement.
I love it. No, we can simplify, but you don't have to give it all up. It's really, really thought-provoking. Thank you for taking us there, Marni. So what do you think you're best at? What's your specialty or gift here? What stands out?
I think planting seeds with the right people is really fun. I'd say that's definitely a strength. So I guess it's recognizing that, to be an influencer, you don't have to do all the work yourself. And obviously, every accomplishment I've ever had in my life is not just my sole doing. There's always been a team of people around that have supported me, or I've supported them.
Sure.
But I think just like the example I gave with Tor Mayor earlier, where you plant a seed. It's like, God, you got to check out this class. The Sustainable Building Advisor is the coolest. That's all that needed to happen with my friend that owned the store, right? She took that and ran the rest of the field with that path. I'd say the same goes with any other thing I've worked on, the Living Future Conference. That was a seed that was planted about conferences that don't have to be static and don't have to be the dull PowerPoint. So how can we transform education and networking? But again, it was a seed of an idea that was planted. And then I felt like, whew, great. Like I have that ability to drop that idea, implement it the first year, provide kind of a set of principles and then keep moving. So those are just two examples. And I can't wait to see what's next, because I always find myself, as you noted, like right at the kind of beginning of things, right at the cutting edge or the cusp, or as Tom Paladino used to say, like the bleeding edge. Yeah. So looking for also what's next is really exciting. And then again, how do you create that influence?
Love the optimism. It's contagious. This is really cool. Yeah, Marni, a few rapid fire questions here. Do you have any routines or rituals that kind of help you stay on point, help you stay successful?
Well, let's see. Ritual wise, I always wear the same blazer whenever I speak in public or teach a class or anything. So if you could see me right now, even though like I'm wearing just like a pair of shorts on the bottom, I'm wearing my favorite green blazer on top right now. I always have to wear the same thing.
Speaking, yeah.
The blazer's getting a little old. It's about 20 years old now. It's getting a little worn. I always want to feel comfortable in my skin. So I always pick the favorite coat that reminds me of all the good times and powerful moments I've had, because I want to feel powerful. So maybe a weird ritual. I don't know.
It's green. That's
yeah. Well, exactly. Green with a little hint of velvet around the edge, because, a girl needs a little luxury.
What about, health-wise, anything fitness or yoga or just eating? It sounds like you're really into, some holistic living. You're going to grow the garden, but any other just pro tips that really help you?
Yeah. Well, I certainly am not into routine, but what I don't do is I don't use my laptop late at night or on weekends. So I limit technology. I am vegan and very focused on health and well-being from a nutrition standpoint. And of course, there's lots of really, well-studied, documented reasons to be a vegan. And I just, love preparing awesome meals and drinking fresh smoothies that have, everything packed in there. Spirulina and seaweed and dates and, turmeric and you name it. So it's probably the daily smoothie. Love yoga, and I love biking and dancing. The two-stepping capital of the world, Austin, Texas, is a great place to go cut a rug. Yeah, definitely all those, but I don't do them on any sort of routine.
I was just saying it's very helpful to get a peek into you, because that's what I do on the podcast. Show us a little more about you, your journey, and this is pretty cool. And thank you for sharing all this. But yeah, what else there about Austin, and which is an incredible town. I know there's a lot of people moving there, but it's just such a fun city.
Yeah, it is fun. I think there's like a real affinity for the outdoors. Health, of course, is a very key component of Austin's culture, with Whole Foods flagship having started there so many years ago. Center for Maximum Potential Building Systems is there. There's just a lot going on as far as sustainability. And it's just, there's, if a gal wanted to pack up her schedule, she could almost every night go to something green related, sustainability related, every night after work. It's definitely a great, fun place to live. However, I jokingly, and other folks will say, it's an incredible place to live, but don't move here. It makes our property taxes go up.
It's like Austin and Nashville, Tennessee, those two booming. But, Marni, let's talk about a bucket list. I'm a big fan of a bucket list. Are there one or two things you could share that are maybe on your bucket list? I'm not sure if there's some travel, adventure, a book, or who knows what, but what's on the bucket list?
Well, I've always wanted to go back up to Canada, and I think I could add building my own home to the bucket list. So, and maybe find some jaw-dropping piece of land and put into practice everything I've ever learned about self-reliance and deep green living, and maybe use that as a laboratory for learning, but also bring others in to, throw a fun, wild party here or there. Also learn about new techniques or age-old techniques, really, hands-on style. So we'll see where that goes. But it's definitely on the bucket list for sure. I've always wanted to write a book.
Good.
And I want that to be about the intersection between architecture and spirituality and human consciousness. I think that's the book that has yet to be written, at least not that I have found. So if anyone has any links they want to share, I would take them now. I need to suck up some resources in that regard, but really look at the sort of like the moral compass of the building industry and how that has played out over the years and maybe in the future.
Yeah, there's a big talk about expanding, right, the triple bottom line and just the ethics of it and just the place. And so you've got to write that book. They say we all have a book in this. So good luck with the bucket list and hope you find that piece of property. And who knows, maybe take the Spartan up there once you get the property when it's ready and then you build the house later,
Yeah, you're totally on to me.
Let's talk about books and learning. That's one reason we do the podcast, is just to encourage, but also teach. And, when it comes to books, though, do you like to pick up a good book in your hands or maybe listen to audiobooks? So just, is there a book or two you'd recommend?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just recently went to the book tour for Marie Forleo's newest book, and it's called Everything is Figureoutable. And if you haven't heard of Marie Forleo, she is considered a spiritual thought leader of the next generation by Oprah. She's worked with Tony Robbins and with the founder of Virgin Airlines, whose name I can't remember, Richard Branson. Remarkable human. And her book, Everything is Figureoutable, seems to me like the thing that we need to help us, really digest the big problems that we have in the world and bring them into small, manageable, actionable tasks. So I highly recommend that. I'm sure other folks on your podcast have already mentioned TrimTab, and I subscribe to TrimTab, which is started as the publication of the International Living Future Institute. Basically, anytime I get an email alerting me that TrimTab is available, I stop everything I'm doing. I silence my phone, I pour a glass of wine, and that's the thing that I do. So anything in that publication is great. Anything written by Jason McLennan is awesome too, but that is definitely a go-to in the green building world for me.
Thank you. The incredible recommendations. We're going to put links to that in the podcast show notes. This is really, really a lot of fun. Incredible recommendations and pro tips. Marni, as we start to wrap up, kind of two questions here. One is, is there anything we should have known a little earlier in your career, any earlier career advice? And then we'll go to just any encouragement to someone that's maybe jumping in right now. But anything you wish you'd have known a little earlier in this 20-year green building journey?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. I think I wish that I knew earlier that what we're striving for isn't necessarily a goal, right? It's not to end world hunger or to create the tallest skyscraper, right? It's to follow a feeling, right? It's to follow feelings and then pursue actions that make you feel that way. So I think, if somebody could have told me, instead of setting that goal to earn a promotion, what if I set out a goal to feel successful?
I like that.
What would that look like instead, right? That's great, and we can quantify and we can measure all the aspects of our green building actions and performance. But at the end of the day, how do the people that live in our buildings, work in our buildings, learn in our buildings feel? How do we feel as we're working through the process of designing them or retrofitting them, right? What is the feeling that each of us achieves through the work that we do? So I think if I had set goals that were more soulful and around feelings early on, I don't know that I would have pursued the exact same path. No. Or at least I would have felt more fulfilled rather than just like, got to get the next biggest. Granted, that's exciting too. But again, chasing that feeling. What is that feeling of success?
Love it. It's all about asking better questions, even to ourselves. Last question, just, a lot of listeners, some have been doing this a long time, other LEED fellows, other green building experts around the world, and some just now jumping, though, into the green building movement. Marni, any just final words of encouragement for someone that's jumping in now?
Yeah, definitely. I would say stretch yourself as absolutely far as possible. And the examples that I want to give of that are, for example, back in 1995, when I was journaling and creating a journal entry called Dream Jobs, I added a bunch of things that I just thought were such a huge stretch. There was absolutely no way that my mind could comprehend how I could achieve these things. So, one of those was repairing a war-torn city and using architecture to do that. What is that job? I didn't even know what that was, but I wrote it down. Fast forward, 20, 25 years later, I find myself presenting about LEED for cities in Belgrade, Serbia, right? I'm talking to the federal government about the role of architecture and urban design to help heal war-torn cities. So that's a stretch. How would I ever have imagined that I could get there? There was no plan in place. It's just by writing it down. So another example, when I started working in architecture and I knew I wanted to do green building, I had no idea what that even was. I did a bunch of research. I found the opening at Paladino. I did not have the credentials at that time. There was no way. But I wrote it in my journal under Dream Job. I kept the description and I put it away. And then shortly thereafter, a few years later, I had acquired all the skills that I needed to get hired. So I guess the point there is just stretch. If you want to live on the moon, if you want to do the biggest, boldest things in the world, you can. You just have to, you can figure it out and you just have to trust.
What a great piece of advice, and just a really great, not just career, but I'd have to say, Marni, you are incredibly calm, but at the exact same time, incredibly excited about the future. You're an optimist, so a very calm optimist. I love it. I've enjoyed our talk today, and I can't thank you enough for what you've done for our industry, planting those seeds in some incredible programs. And I just want to say thank you, and thank you for being on the podcast today.
Oh, Charlie, it's my pleasure. And thanks to everyone for listening.
I just want to say thank you to our loyal listeners. We actually are celebrating over 1 year here on the Green Building Matters podcast. Me and the entire team were stoked and just so glad you continue to listen every Wednesday morning to a new interview with a green building professional here in this industry, or just some pro tips that we want to make sure that you are getting straight from us, straight to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At GBES.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.